Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, and what life is like in the industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout Massachusetts. Currently, the communities that he centers on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and Easthampton, also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, also parks, houses, and streets. So he personally gives all of his presentations and tours himself, and in today's episode we will be discussing the St. Brigid Cemetery, located in the community of Easthampton. So tell us about the history of this cemetery.
Okay, this is a nice Catholic cemetery in Easthampton. It's found along one of the reservoirs there, and that reservoir was for power, and a lot of the homes around there were for workers, and you can guess the cemetery was filled up with a lot of workers in the mills of Easthampton. Now, the history of the cemetery is such that it was started by the Immaculate Conception Church and in Easthampton, now called Our Lady of the Valley Church. And it's a very old cemetery. It was used by 3 different churches in Easthampton, all the Catholic ones, and that includes the Sacred Heart of Jesus Church, which is a Polish ethnic church. It also includes the French Canadian Church, which is the Notre Dame de Bon Console Church, and they all buried their dead there until the year 1923, when the Sacred Heart Church of Easthampton opened their own cemetery, which ended up being called St. Stanislaus. So if you go into this beautiful St. Brigid Cemetery, you'll see the center is nice and gorgeous. There's 2 priest circles. There's paupers and baby graves towards the back, and we'll talk about that issue. And what we also talk about was some of the neighborhood and some of the pastors that are buried here. Now, the cemetery itself is thought to be from the late 1860s or 1870s. I'm still working on an exact date. And when you go through it, it's very obvious all 3 ethnic groups are very obviously around, and they're all mixed together. But there's a couple of nice priest circles, one big one towards the back right and a smaller one towards the back left. And we'll talk about all those issues.
So what our pastors are buried here?
Okay, so when you go to the priest circle in the back right, you'll find that in the very front of that priest circle, there's a Reverend Walsh, a native of Ireland, and he served, of course, at the Immaculate Conception Church in Easthampton. He was not the absolute first pastor, but he was one of the most important. He died in 1914. All right, now, when you go there and you walk around that priest circle, you'll notice towards the back, there's a stone there. And so you think, oh, the priests are out front of this priest circle. No, in the very back there's one, and he was one of the pastors at the Sacred Heart Church, which is the Polish ethnic church. His full name is Wenceslaw Lenz, and he died in the year 1914. I don't know why they decided to bury him in the back. Maybe they're splitting the circle into the front being the Irish priest and the back being the Polish priest. It's very strange. Another very strange thing is when you walk around a circle, you would at least expect all the gravestones to face outwards from the circle so that people can read as they walk around. But his stone faces in towards a bush, and so you have to go around and look at it. That's very peculiar. So when you walk around the front, you also see a note, I think it's on the angel stone, about another priest that's buried here, a priest called Michael Murphy. Right? He was one of the reverends. I think he came later, like the 8th pastor of all.
So quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, For more information or to sign up for various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org, and there you can find videos and podcasts of the Stop Sign Tour, as well as photos and text of the historical sites as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobsalt4214, capital B, @yahoo.com. And his tour is made for fun, educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, where are the babies and poppers buried?
All right, if you go to that first pre-circle, the older one towards the back right, and you keep walking backwards towards that reservoir that I told you borders on it, you'll find the gravestones start to look very old, very small, and as you go even the back of that part, you find almost no gravestones at all, and then you start to find some baby gravestones. So the very back is the potter's field, and you have the pauper's grave in that section. And a lot of them tend to be, seem to be Polish from the year 1900 to the year 1923, before the Polish got their own cemetery in Easthampton. And you'll see there's quite a few of them. So a lot of them couldn't afford any stones at all, couldn't afford their burials, and probably had to be buried for free by the church. Now, if you keep going even further back, you come to a little section of baby gravestones, and this is probably the baby section. Babies that were never baptized in the Catholic Church could not be buried in the holy part of the cemetery. So you had to bury them somewhere off the holy ground. And here, that's towards the right back, almost at the edge of where the reservoir is. Now, if you keep walking around the cemetery, you find many beautiful stones around. For instance, there's a gorgeous stone of the Patrick McCarthy family, probably the nicest stone in the whole cemetery, which has a picture of Mary holding a crucifix, a large crucifix, instead of Jesus holding a crucifix. Then there's also the O'Brien family. I found an old picture of the layout of the cemetery, and I'll talk about that in this next section. But so the cemetery is quite different, I found out. And one last thing you'll find, there's a modern section, and one thing, there's a second pre-circle, right? So that's towards the front left instead of the back right like the other one. Why they start a second pre-circle, I don't know, but it's kind of a memorial section. Has Pastor Patrick Doyle is buried there, and there's a statue of Mary and a plaque honoring Patrick Doyle, and then a bench in front. So maybe they had some different criteria to go by.
And tell us about the immediate neighborhood.
Okay, the neighborhood around it on Everett Street has on it some worker homes that belong to the West Boylston Mill, which is across the reservoir. Now, what are worker homes doing across our reservoir instead of on the same side? So you have these big mills that belong to the West Boylston Company, and you have worker homes for them behind, near those mills, so there's a small group near them, and there's a bigger group on one side of the reservoir, but on the total other side of the reservoir, far away, you have more worker housing. Well, they needed so much space that they built them there, and what do? Across that reservoir, they put 2 pedestrian bridges. The bridges were about 250 yards long, and workers can go on them and cross them and get to the work very quickly. They can get to work within 5 minutes instead of having to go the long way around, which would take 20 minutes. So that's a very cool fact about this. Another thing that's very interesting about the cemetery is that I saw a 1936 photo of the cemetery, and all the ground on any given family plot had raised soil for that family. And it doesn't have that anymore. And I'm glad it doesn't have that anymore, because when you raise soil up in a cemetery, it's much more likely that water will start to push out against that raised surface and cause the gravestone memorials to collapse over. And since it was taken out, this cemetery is a very beautiful cemetery. The Maple Grove Cemetery in Chicopee kept the raised soil around its monuments, and many of its monuments are now collapsing to the ground.
Thank you, Robert, for educating us on tours and historical topics of your expertise. And thank you to our sponsors. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of other podcasts at his website, SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you, and hope you join us again.